Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Human Perspective. Today, I have the honor of having a discussion with LeDerick Horne, who I luckily met. When did we first meet? Like a month or so ago?
About a month ago, yeah.
One thing I love about doing The Human Perspective is the people that I'm meeting in many different ways and a whole new world that's opening up. And you definitely are someone that is really rocking my world. And I think, we'll also through this interview enable other people to really learn about who you are and the wealth of who you are and the wisdom of who you are. For me, I wrote this down, you exude strength and confidence.
Oh, well, thank you.
And I'd like you to talk about little of your background and ask when you were growing up, how did you discover that you had a learning disability?
So I think like many people with learning disabilities, it really started to show up when I started going to school. So not initially, kindergarten was fine, but by the time I got to the first grade, it was clear that I had something going on. I ended up doing the first grade twice. And it was only when I got to the third grade that a teacher, I think maybe out of frustration, realized that I couldn't read that well. And the process of me getting evaluated was done. And the first label I was given was that of being neurologically impaired. And that was when I was 9 years old.
What year was that?
Oh, so I guess that would be 2000, not 2000, 1980.
In the 1980s.
Yeah, the mid 80s, yeah.
Yeah, I think you were saying like 1982, maybe, when the law had come out, IDEA, in 1975.
Yeah,
so it was still a relatively new law. So, I'm a former second grade teacher. I'm curious to know, were they trying in the regular classroom alternative ways outside of, traditional reading, working with you on comprehension and other ways of getting information other than the traditional reading?
Not when I was younger, not too much. I don't remember it. So it really didn't. If it was, it didn't stick. I don't remember much of that. I remember a lot of flashcards. I remember going to a resource room that was a teacher's closet, a storage closet, and then eventually being placed in special education. But none of the Wilson or any of the sort of things that we're using now.
Tell us a little bit about your parents.
So I got two great parents. My mother's from Houston, and my father was born on a farm in Georgia, in southern Georgia, but grew up here in central New Jersey. And they both met each other down at Dillard University in Louisiana. Mom is retired from working at Rutgers University. She worked in the human resource department. My father was a health and physical education teacher, sort of legendary cross-country coach here in central New Jersey. My father actually just passed away this year. But he left thank you. But he left such a huge impact on me. So yeah, Mr.
You and the family are the legacy.
Yeah, we are. And I look a lot like him, so that's nice.
So when you were, I'm sure it was before the teacher sent you to be evaluated that you were exhibiting problems of reading. What was going on in your family and in the classroom?
Yeah, so my mother is the person that spent the most time just trying to get me to spell, trying to teach me the alphabet. I can remember her, I always I hated bringing that vocabulary list home. I remember one one day it was like a snowdrift, and I just took the paper and just stuck it in the snowdrift, just trying to hide it.
Why was that?
Because it was painful. There was just a lot of embarrassment and shame. I knew that it was something I couldn't do, at least not the way in which I was being asked to do it. And so I was constantly just trying to avoid the pain of having to learn to spell. But yeah, they tried and they tried and they tried. And I think that, I've talked to my mother, and one of the things that she has said to me was that once the professionals on the IEP team, and when I was younger, it was the child study team, when they showed up and they said, here's the diagnosis, and he should be in a self-contained special ed classroom, that's the best thing for him. She just sort of, to a degree, just sort of backed away, because I think it was just so much, she had expended so much energy trying to help me to get through school.
So you were in these special ed classes for quite a number of years. And I think, unfortunately, like too many of these special ed programs, you were not thriving. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I academically began to do better, right? So I learned the alphabet and, began to read better and spell and that sort of stuff. But the social aspect of it, it being in a segregated setting, the way that worked away at my self-perception, my vision of my future, that was very negative. And those are scars that I still carry today. Those are still issues that I'm working through even as an adult.
I want to, for a few minutes, fast forward to today and talk a little bit about who you are today. We're going to get into reading or having you read a number of your poems. But before we do that, if you could talk a little bit about where you are today, because I've looked at some of your YouTube channel, and the reason I said that, you exude this strength and confidence is really, when I was observing you speaking and people's reactions, it's very powerful. Yeah. And families and children, young adults who really welcome what you're saying. It's kind of like you're releasing something to allow people to know that they're not alone and what can be achieved. So could you talk a little bit about that? How you've come to being able to be that person?
So now I spend a lot of time, bulk of my time, working with state departments of education, local school districts. I do a lot of teacher trainings and workshops and keynotes at conferences. And I think one of the big tricks of life is to take maybe the more painful things that have happened to you and use them as a fuel to do good in the world. And so I've realized that I am an outlier. The degree at which
I've been. What does that mean?
So statistically, as a African American male who passed through special education with a learning disability, I have a BA in mathematics. I minored in fine art.
Note that everybody has a BA in mathematics.
Right.
Keep going.
Right. I minored in fine art. I co-authored a book a few years ago. These are things that statistically generally do not happen for folks like me. So what I want to do is to use my experience and the talents that I've been given and honed over the years to make an easier path for folks with disabilities, the young people coming up now and the adults who are out in the adult world now. So yeah, so that's what I do. Bulk of my focus is around education reform.
What are some of the big, when you talk about education reform, what are some of the big points you make?
So that it's very important that we give our young people with disabilities the experiences that are going to allow them to embrace that disability, not experience shame, but see it as a positive identifier. That our expectations need to be very, very high, particularly around the idea of young people playing a leadership role in their own education. So, work around student-directed IEPs, self-determination. And then I also think that, and I've done a lot of work around youth leadership, youth and young adult leadership. So making sure that young people with disabilities are in meaningful roles and being able to steer agencies, organizations that are put in place to support people with disabilities.
So maybe we could start out by reading a poem. And I think the first one, well, first, before we get to reading a poem, what made you decide that you wanted to explore becoming a poet?
I don't know if I think it was something that I was born with, you know. I I think I've always enjoyed language. And when I was a little kid, my family had this tradition that my mother and father would wake up on weekend mornings and play records. And it was folk music and, music from all kind of different genres. And I remember sitting on the carpet in my living room and just soaking in all of these wonderful words and this great language. And I'd always been drawn to poetry. I remember maybe one of the first real poems that I heard was the first season of The Simpsons. They've had a Halloween special. And at the end of it, Bart and Homer did a rendition of the Raven, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. And I remember like walking in, and Miss Yates, who was my special ed teacher, walking into her room after hearing that poem the night before, and just being like, I heard this poem, and what was this? And she took me down to the library and gave me, helped me check out my first collection of poetry, of Poe's work. So I think it's always been there, but once I got to college, once I got to be a part of a really good support program for students with learning disabilities, and once my counselor said, stop worrying about the spelling and just write, it gave me the freedom to express myself, and it came out as poetry.
How old were you when that happened?
18 years old. 18.
So we'll get back to talking more about this because I want to spend a little time with your poetry. And do you want to start out with Alex's Place?
Yes. So it's Alex's Place.
Background.
Yeah, it's Alex's Place soundtrack, and in thinking about all the music I heard growing up, and just all the sort of sounds that I think influenced me. This is me trying to capture it, and it's the name comes from Alex's Place, which is the street that I grew up on as a kid. Okay, let's see. Mama gave me P-Funk, George Clint, 45 spinning like a windmill. You'll kill yourself chasing after break beats, break down, turn up the volume when the Godfather screaming like that. Now we going uptown, last poet, Congo, lyrics use a gas man, Jones be falling when I hear it some party and BS, but don't be scared when the revolution hits you like that. Now what? Papa playing James T, Simon, Garfunk era with the Hotel, California, rockin' plus the doo-wop, diddy diddy dum diddy do, have my whole house singing like that. Yeah, man. This is just a soundtrack, childhood, young boy moving with the lead stitch, music, sewn in my jeans, had a BMX, jump right with the rhythm, I was FRESH, like them girls turning rope on my block, singing, run and tell your mama about that. Yeah. It was like that.
Thank you so much. It's like an amazing, the words are wonderful, and the rhythm and the way you express yourself. What are people's reactions to the poem?
So so it's performance poetry, right?
Yes.
And I, good friend of mine, Justin Wu, I remember him telling me that to do a performance poem, it means to be the writer, director, the actor, and the choreographer of a very short play, right? So it's all those pieces involved. And I think people enjoy it, right? Particularly young people, because oftentimes they're kind of like force-fed sort of standard poetry, and this sounds a little bit more like what they hear on the radio. So I think that poetry in general is a very powerful means by which to transmit not only information, but also the emotion, but behind why you should be listening to something. And particularly, in a conference or professional development setting, there's a lot of like corny, dry, boring PowerPoints. And so when I stand up there and I hit them with a poem to begin with, like people like, oh, wow, it's something new, something different.
Do you have the words captioned when you're saying them?
Yeah, so some of the most fun I've had on stage is, and I have to generally work, with the tech folks beforehand to make sure the poems are loaded up, because that's like way too much to try to type. What I love is a really great interpreter, a sign language interpreter. And I always you can feel it. It's like a dance, even if they're in my peripheral vision, the ones that really get into it. And I've got a couple of videos on my YouTube channel of me with an interpreter, because I was watching her and I said, we got to capture this. Yeah.
Do you meet with them in advance?
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Which is very helpful.
Yeah, and some of them, I've had a few that are just like, look, I can't do that, like, but for some, they're up for the challenge. But I meet with them beforehand, and when I have enough of a notice, we'll give them a hard copy or what have you.
Yeah, and hard copy is obviously very important because they get the words, which is important. But I think as you're expressing it, it's not just a poem that you read. It's a performance piece, as you say. Yeah. And so really, I have a couple of friends who are amazing interpreters and interpret theater and other things like that. And those are people who are used to this.
Right.
And it's a story, it's a story of you and your family, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's pulling cultural elements that were important to me. So, the word I spell out fresh at the end, and fresh is a huge word in my life because that is the first word that I learned to spell on my own. Okay. And the reason why that happened was because, like, I remember my mother being in the kitchen with her back to me, working at the stove, and I'm at the table and I'm wrestling with trying to spell some word. And I said to her, you know what, I can spell a word, and I spelled out fresh. And the only reason I was able to do it because on the radio at the time, there was a song and the hook was F-R-E-S-H, fresh, 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 that's fresh. And so the mnemonic is what, allowed the spelling to stick.
Do you play music?
I don't, no, I don't.
No instruments, okay.
Yeah.
Do you sing at all?
Very badly, you don't want to hear that.
Let's go to another poem. The one you were going to read is called Rosemary Kennedy. Could you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so this is the full title is A Love Poem for Rosemary Kennedy. And I believe it was 2005 that she passed away. And I didn't really know much about her story, but began digging into it. And as far as I know, there are some people that say that she may have been very LD, right? Really struggled academically, was acting out, and her family sought, what was sort of a cutting edge medical solution to that issue, which was a frontal lobe lobotomy. And initially, like as an advocate and as a person with a disability, I was like, oh, this is so hard. I was focusing so much on it. But the more I sort of dug into her story, and I was just like, man, this woman she just seemed amazing to me. And so I said, well, what do you do for an amazing lady? You write her a love poem. So that's how the poem came about.
And you wrote it after she died?
After she passed away, yeah.
And for those in the audience, Rosemary Kennedy was the sister of the late President Kennedy and Bobby and Ted Kennedy. And I think she was originally identified as having a developmental disability.
Well, what I heard was that the developmental disability is what came after the lobotomy. That she probably had some sort of cognitive impairment where she struggled academically. There are some people, apparently she kept journals, who looked at her writing and said she may have been like severely LD. But yeah, I mean, it's a tragic story, and as opposed to just focusing in on sort of this procedure, I said, no, let me do what I can to celebrate her. You should see them, Rose. There are members of this new generation who at age 12 have more strength than you and I have ever known. Their confident steps always strike me with a wave of envious joy that I pray finds its way to you, my Rosemary. I know you from the images that have floated my way. Newspaper clippings from London, a black and white family portrait, the way you set your head just off center, beaming from the back row. And then there is that film, shot in a sun-filled pool, long limbs dancing through water, that look of unrestrained bliss, a weightless figure, cutting the gentlest of lines. Perhaps at the end of my life, we will meet. Your smile, your salutation, this poem, mine. It is a note that I have been crafting ever since reporters announced the end of your life and all the details that now bind me to you. So like a castaway, collecting polished stones for his distant love, I have walked along my own shore, pausing, reaching down, and looking out at a horizon colored by your hues. You are the mother of 1,000 Olympians, and your family's poetry inspired a nation. But I wonder, dear Rose, has anyone ever given you a poem? It is a little thing, a gesture often overlooked by our caregivers, not as important as food or a warm bed, but you and I know it is the little things which make the difference between having life and truly being alive. What this world took, my words cannot replace. I have no balm to heal your wounded soul, only this gift that I set adrift, hoping it finds you born anew, once again young, perfect, beautiful, and whole.
Very powerful. Have you shared this with the Kennedys?
You know, I think it was in 2019, I was asked to perform for the Kennedy Center. They do an excellent conference on the intersection of arts education and special education. And so I got to do it for the center as part of that. And I think someone said they made sure they handed it off to one of the Kennedys, but never with anyone in front of me.
Yeah, can you send me a hard copy of it?
Of course, of course.
So let's read the third poem.
Okay.
And it's called Until Every Barrier Falls.
Yes.
And you just wrote that this year.
I did.
And that's how we met.
Yes. Yes, it is. And you know, and I was typing, like I found you online, your email, and I was typing like very passive, you know, like Miss Human, I wrote this poem, we made a video, you know, I'd like you to check it out. Let me know what you think. And you had already like reached out to me on LinkedIn saying, hey, I saw your poem. You want to talk?
That's because of the wonderful Becca Howell.
Oh, great.
Yeah, who really is social media par excellence. So let's hear it.
Okay. All right. And I'll just say that this began as something that I wrote for the 30th anniversary of the ADA. This is for the ones who would not be trapped behind exclusion's shameful wall. And this is for the ones who will continue to push until every barrier falls. This is for every wounded warrior who came home and challenged our grateful nation to elevate its expectations. This is for the ones who blocked the buses, sat in the sit-ins, and crawled to the Capitol. This is for the protesters, the marchers, those adapt angels with wheelchair wings who troubled the waters of their time so that this generation might live in a more inclusive now. As I write this, all over America, monuments are falling, and only questions stand atop each empty pedestal. As I recite this, I hope an artist is listening and will respond with marble and bronze. But until then, Ed Roberts, Judy Heumann, this poem is for you. Let each line chase the light in your smiles and trace the contours of your commitment. Let these words salute those dedicated to the ideals that equality sprouts from the branch of equity. Independence is the flower that grows from access, and freedom is rooted in the soil of advocacy. This is for the ones who have embraced the reality that humanity is both fragile and mighty. And when we ask for help, it is not a sign of weakness, but instead is an indication of our determination. However you navigate, it is legit. This is for those who read with their eyes, ears, and fingertips. This is for the minds that dance in details, and for the wide-eyed ones that remake the world with every thought they think. We are the river of innovation from which the whole world drinks. And who am I? I am a lover of words, left heartbroken by every spelling test. In school, my desk was in a classroom at the end of the hall, so this poem is for me too. Within me is the meeting of two movements. I am Black and blue. My disability is hidden, and I am the descendant of those who could not hide. I am your neighbor, your countryman, one of the poets our nation has produced. And here is what I know to be true. This world is not enough. And if this here is what we call normal, I say, let's be different. Let us, on this day, celebrate every shape, every color, every way. Let our actions commemorate the array of our being. Build a future in service of the multitude, and let this century be the wilderness from which our better selves are born.
Amen.
All right.
Beautiful. How long does it take you to write a poem like this?
That poem took 2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks. It used to be a longhand and a notebook, and now it's mainly on my phone. A lot of speech to text to help me with the spelling, and yeah.
And that works.
It gets it done. Yeah.
So we're getting close to ending now, and I would like you really to give some thought to words of people both who are younger and are older and have learning disabilities and other forms of disabilities and other forms of diversity, regarding words of wisdom.
Words of wisdom, yeah. Well, this is the holiday season. We're going to release this during that time, and I think one of the things that is so important is community. It's amazing that you and I have been able to connect. You're definitely one of my heroes, and
Vice versa.
thank you. And just in the time in which we've known each other, like Judy Human connects people and it's like, okay, this is what you're working on. You should do this, you should do that. And I know throughout my entire life, and particularly once I became more out as a person with a disability, being able to connect with other people with disabilities has been the way in which I've found about supports and accommodations and what have you. And so, one of the things that I think is important for all people with disabilities, but particularly for those of us with hidden disabilities, is to make sure that we live out as people with disabilities. I think it is one of the messages that I consistently leave to the educators that I speak to, is that, I think part of building a more inclusive world and more inclusive schools is, of course, allowing for inclusion for our students, but we also need to make sure that we're hiring more people with disabilities, and we're creating a culture within our schools that allow people who maybe have hidden disabilities feel more comfortable coming out. And so, yeah, so connecting to that community is valuable, right? Because, there's power in community, and yeah, there's no need to be ashamed. I mean, I understand that stigma, and I've lived with it, and battled through it. And on the other side is a place of a lot of pride and empowerment.
So LeDerick, I want to really thank you for spending so much time with us today, for sharing little parts of who you are. And as I've been saying, exuding your strength and confidence, which I know that people in the audience will take from you. And for the people in the audience, um, particularly those of you who have invisible disabilities and who have felt, the shame and exclusion that LeDerick was discussing, take his words to heart and break out. And if you can write poetry, that would be great, but you can do it in so many ways. So thank you so much, LeDerick, for being with us. I hope you and your family have a wonderful holiday and that we get to meet each other in person sooner than later.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Judy. I appreciate it. Be well.
You too.